I'm about to sit down with one of the most influential CEOs in the world, global CEO and chairman of General Electric, Jeff Immelt. He took the company reins just 4 days before September 11, and as confidence in corporate America plummeted, he re-inspired from the top down.
Jumpstart that business.
Wise corporates watched and followed his lead as he refocused GE's core on innovation and customers. But what's been the personal cost of 100-hour weeks, living 60% on the road to keep driving growth? And how does he see Australia's future in the global big picture?
We've been in Australia for a long time, since Thomas Edison.
I've been looking forward to this Australian exclusive for months. Join me for a top shelf on the record, only on Sky News Business. Jeff Immelt, a warm welcome to you. Great to have you on the show.
Great to see you.
Coming up 11 years at the helm, where it all got underway with such drama and really didn't let up, let's be honest about it. 9/11, Hurricane Katrina, the Arab Spring, and so the list goes on. When you reflect on all of that, how do you lead a team in periods of great uncertainty?
Well, you know, Carson, I think the first thing I'd say is just the last decade have been extraordinary, you know, and I think in some ways juxtaposed against, at least if you were an American, a pretty passive previous 20 or 25 years. You know, the last decade has been, you know, I'd say just lots of different things going on. And I would say, you know, leadership in that environment is about finding ways to stay safe. So in the case of a company like ours, is to have a lot of cash and things like that. But at the same time, you know, always having kind of an economic point of view and pointing forward all the time, even when the wind is howling and things like that. I'd say it's a combination of you have to know how to play offense and defense at the same time. And companies that know how to do that do well.
Absent any of those adjuncts, though, to what you've said, can you make a play beyond that? In other words, can you be bold where others are fearful without cash being king?
You know, I think you're foolish today if you don't have a nest egg, whether you're a small company or a big company, just because there's so many things out of all of our control. Beyond that, I think you got to go. You got to be willing to invest. I mean, I read in the U.S. about, you know, there's a lot of cash on corporate balance sheets, which there are, and people that say, gosh, we have to wait until there's more certainty before we invest. I think that's crazy. I just don't think, you know, we could wake up a year from now and not have the U.S. Deficit understood, not have Greece understood, you know, still having all this volatility, and if you've sat back the last year, that's just time wasted. So we have investable themes that we're going to keep investing in, but at the same time, people that have no nest egg at all, you're flying too close to the sun, and whether you're small or big, you're going to get burned.
A lot of companies on the Dow have been burned. You've somehow survived to be the longest enduring one of them all, from the very beginnings to the present. You look across at the NASDAQ, a lot of fever, a lot of concern that history's already starting to repeat with that ill-fated Facebook foray this year. When you reflect on that, are you thinking that we've learnt, you know, our lessons, or are we just trying to always go back?
You know, there's always cycles. You're always going to have, you know, we've survived a long time, not because we've always been perfect, but because we've learned, we've continued to evolve and grow and change. You know, if you go back 10 years to the tech bubble, right? There were companies by the name of Amazon that was considered part of the tech bubble, Oracle, part of the tech bubble. These are great companies, you know, like 10 or 15 years later. They're phenomenal companies, and there are other companies that, Pets.com and things like that, that went bust. So I just think there's always a natural evolution, and great companies survive and do better, and companies that don't have a premise don't.
What's been the greatest change? You said we continue to learn, evolve and change, but what has been the greatest, most fundamental change moment off the back of this great crisis?
I think that, look, I think if, you know, I'm 56, I'm 30 years with GE, I think my generation of managers, or particularly younger people than me, have seen what tail risk is. In other words, it's one thing to do a PowerPoint scenario or you know, look, if things go wrong, this is what it looks like. It's the other thing to live it, you know. And when you've lived tail risk, like, you know, Lehman Brothers bankruptcy or Hurricane Katrina or 9/11, you become, you know, you change. So I think you've got a generation of people that have lived tail risk in a way that their predecessors really hadn't. And I think that's one of the biggest differences.
From tail risks to tailwinds, you've said in the past, smart companies have to be able to create our own growth. We can't rely on those tailwinds of 1985, of 2004. Again, though, size is everything. You can make that comment with, as I've said to you, 100 bill in the bank, or 100 million, let's be fair.
Yeah.
It would be lovely to have the B, but the M will do quite nicely. But alongside of that, for the small to medium-sized businesses, that kind of rings a little hollow, does it not?
Well, I mean, I think for a big company, you know, if you went back to, let's say, 2003, just a company our size, we used to launch maybe 200 new products every year. Now we do 1,000, right? That's the difference between spending 2% of your revenue in R&D to spending 6% of your revenue in R&D. Now you're going to, you know, maybe 200 in a fast growth world would be fine. Today, you need 1,000 in the global economy we have today to grow 2 times GDP or whatever your goals are.
And
I think for a small business, you know, Carson, what it means is you've got to have something you're good at. You know, really, if you're a small company, maybe you're more focused than the GE is, but you're still going to have to make big investments in R&D. You're still going to have to bet on a market or a region or something like that. And
Isn't it about scale, though? Particularly with currencies being debased the way they are, you don't have a hope in hell unless you can deliver to market en masse.
But look, some of scale, but, you know, I can't tell you how many suppliers we have who are $50 or $100 million companies that are good at one thing. They're good at coating titanium. They're good at packaging with lightweight. They're good at assembling towers for wind turbines.
What's Australia good at? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, you're pretty scathing about a chronic absence of parts on critical infrastructure here that could be manufactured here down under. Instead, they're coming from everywhere but here.
You know, Carson, first I would say, you know, I'm an observer of Australia. You know, so there's other people that are But I would say at the outset, let's look at a bigger picture, right? 5% unemployment, good long-term GDP growth, deep natural resources, high per capita income. So, you know, a lot of countries in the world would love to change places with Australia today.
But debt doesn't escape us. Very high household debt to GDP.
So that's on one side.
All right.
On the other side, I think it's an unbalanced economy, right? Between the resource rich and the industrial base, you've got labor productivity issues. You've got, you know, the need to get different people in different parts of the country. You know, I'd say in some ways, if I were to say a little bit from an Australian context, I think there's a need to maybe rediscover manufacturing. There's a need for the country to generate more engineers, to put more into R&D. These are the kind of changes you have to make today in order for 5 or 10 years ago, or 5 or 10 years from now, to have a more balanced economy than what you see today. And those are some of the things that have to happen in Australia. From a GE standpoint, look, we're going to do great here because we can support the natural gas or the mining or things like that. We also want to do more things here. We acquired a mining company called Industrial, or have announced the acquisition of it. It has about 600 employees in that business today. That should be 2 or 3 times that amount within 5 years.
Do you worry, Jeff, that you're in the pursuit of everything, you know, to rule the world, that somehow you lose sight of a core offering to the market?
Look, it's a great question. I think we've tried to simplify the portfolio into infrastructure and really mid-market finance. You know, so look, we've sold NBC, we've sold our plastics business, we sold our silicones business, we sold a lot of the GE Capital businesses. So we're the world's biggest infrastructure company, and I think in the case of Australia, that has a lot of opportunity, and we're about a $400 billion asset financial service company.
Why did you sell NBC, given the need to go on the front foot as never before with a media message that is in every pocket, but also to fall back on credible, I suppose, enduring sources of information? I sense you're persuaded by that proposition.
I think the question you just asked before this one is really the seminal question, which is, media is a great business. You know, we didn't sell NBC because we didn't think it was a good long-term sustainable business that wouldn't benefit from information flows. We took, you know, cash from NBC and bought oil and gas companies and mining companies, because to our investors and to our own people and to me, I said, look, I got 1,000 ways. You know, I would go out of an oil and gas meeting and have 100 ways to grow the business.
So is the pen no longer more powerful than the rig on that mission?
No, but look, I think in the case of Comcast, who we sold NBC to, look, it still makes a ton of sense. It's going to be a good business. But I think you asked the great question is that companies tend to be more focused today. I wanted us to be more focused. It was more about where we could use the capital than it was really a sense that NBC had outlasted its usefulness. I think we're in a better structure today.
20 years younger when you stepped up to the job than Jack Welch. You've acknowledged that you work without a contract. By definition, that means you could be fired within a week. So the metrics that you work to essentially come back to financial earnings and cash profits, which undeniably have done very well. What's kind of Jeff Immelt's sort of the personal view alongside that, as far as the markets you inhabit or choose to keep at arm's length? What governs that decision making?
You know, I think you've got to believe in, even in a company our size, you've got to pick a couple big themes that you believe in that last longer than a year or two, right? So I think if you think about how we position the company, we position the company to be dominant in infrastructure. You know, why? Because there's going to be 1 billion people that join the middle class between now and 2020. There's going to be 3 billion people that join the middle class between now and 2030. They're going to be consumers of health care. They're going to be consumers of electricity. They're going to be consumers. So we are writing a big theme called infrastructure.
And that juggernaut is unstoppable, is it?
It is complete. It's like night follows day. You know, in other words, you can sit back and say, you could make the argument China's going to fail. A lot of people, you know, some people make that argument. I would say if that's your premise, infrastructure is not going to look that good. Australia is not going to look that good. There's a lot of things that are not, but I don't think that's the case. So I think you have to sit back, whether you're a small company or even more importantly, if you're a big company, and you've got to pick, you know, 2 or 3, you know, demographics, infrastructure, supporting mid-market businesses. You know.
Are you factoring into all of that, by extension, the end of communism as we know it, the one-party state in China, a la the Arab Spring, pushing beyond borders?
I think there is this natural desire for people to have more information and for governments to accommodate that, right? And so I'm not really a political scientist or things like that, you know, so I didn't see the Arab Spring coming. I'm fascinated by how it's evolving. I think the Chinese government is reasonably shrewd in that they know the population is changing. Will it be a straight line and perfect? I don't think so. Things change.
You sound remarkably sort of, not nonchalant, but sanguine about it all. I mean, what of all the issues keeps you awake at night?
Look, I think it's how, in the end, you know, in other words, I'm not going to wake up tomorrow morning and have Siemens do something so disruptive, I'm not going to be able to catch up. We have very good competitors, and I respect them. But we're kind of in businesses that can't be disrupted by competition. They're long cycle, high-tech businesses. It's more, I'd say the disruption for us is more how governments interact with each other. It's what do individual governments do? You know, in other words, what's the tax policy in the United States? What's the tax policy in Australia? And then it's how do they interact? Is there more protectionism? Is there war in the Middle East? Or are there things like that? So I'd say for a lot of big companies, multinationals, today the big risk is what do governments do?
Which of all of those
how
ones
do they interact?
has had a fuse let under it? In your view, you mentioned Middle East.
Oh gosh, I think there's an incredible amount going on, more than in my, you know, in other words, you've got a European Union that needs significant fiscal reform. You've got an American debt to GDP ratio that's unsustainable. You've got the Arab Spring. You've got a political change in China. You've got political disruption in India. Really, if you were into political macro risk, it is all over the place. But then I sit back and say, okay, now, so what do I do? I'm running GE. There's all this incredible stuff going on in the world. have a little bit more cash, and go. You know, in other words, I always have to come back and say, look, I can pick up any newspaper and I can read about it. I can see it on TV. I can blog. I can see all that stuff. But then you always have to come back when you're running a company and be practical and say, okay, I got 300,000 people that work for me. They need to wake up. If I walked in tomorrow and I said, I do a blog. I said my blog, the world is a mess. We're all screwed. I got 300,000 people going, well, you know, that's not what I say. I say, look, here's what's going on in the world. Here's what we're going to go do. Let's go. Let's go. And I think that's what you have to do if you're running a company today. There's a lot of things to be worried about. We try to think about them. But in the end, you got to execute on a strategy.
Are you bulletproof?
No. Look, I think I am so humble today. You know, if you've lived through as many crises as I've been through, you're paranoid and humble. So I think we've made the company safer. We've got more cash. We've got financial services smaller, stuff like that. But man, I think humility rules, paranoia rules. Now, you don't want it to the point where you don't do anything. But man, I got to tell you, if you're running a company today, you know what it feels like to be scrutinized. You know what it feels like to be under the gun, but you also have the confidence that you got a great team, a great company, and people that want to win. And if you can balance the humility with a great group of people that want to win, that's a pretty good trade.
My one-on-one with Jeff Immelt, Global CEO and Chairman of General Electric, continuing after this.
Is your best mate a cool cat or an energetic and playful pooch? Best friends come in all shapes and sizes, and there's nothing we wouldn't do to protect them.
I don't know what I'd do if something happened to Max.
Oh, thanks, Sal.
RSPCA Pet Insurance is an easy and affordable way to help ensure you can give your best friend the best veterinary care. Cover starts from just 55 cents a day, and you can choose a level of cover that suits your
Cat
or dog.
RSPCA Pet Insurance can reimburse up to 80% of eligible vet bills. You can claim up to $11,000 per year on visits to any vet licensed in Australia, and there's no additional excess to pay if you make a claim. Plus, you get a discount if you insure more than one pet.
like me.
Oh, me.
And a portion of your premiums go to support the valuable work of the RSPCA.
Thank you.
Help give your best friend the best of care, no matter what shape or size. Call RSPCA Pet Insurance on 1300 730 835 or visit rspcapetinsurance.org.au.
GE, far from calling an end to the mining boom, this week saying it'll base its new global mining headquarters in Brisbane, with industry heavyweight Jeff Knox heading up operations here. More on that and plenty more besides as my Australian exclusive interview with GE Global CEO and Chairman Jeff Immelt continues.
Look, I think we view mining as a really good infrastructure industry where GE's underpenetrated. So in other words, people like BHP, Vale, Rio Tinto, Anglo American, these are big customers of GE and power generation and locomotives, but not big in mining equipment. So we saw in Industria a way to kind of jumpstart that business. It's located in Brisbane. We're going to build the headquarters around that. I also like, you're not really in a country till you're making something in the country. So we've been in Australia for a long time, since Thomas Edison. But it's been basically sales forces selling American products and stuff like that.
Have you had enough failures, though? Have we really failed enough down under?
Yeah.
Do you see evidence of that? Are we allowed to fail and get back up and have another chance?
Yeah, for sure.
Or are we cut down?
I think it's, look, we've failed everywhere. You know, so in other words...
But we as a society, not you as a company, but the mentality that exists here.
Yeah, no, look, I've never seen a country that was in better shape, that was unhappier as Australia.
That's not complacent, is it?
You're the most unhappy, successful country in the world. Now, some of that's endearing. You know, some of that is part of the hunger to want to do better and things like that. And some of it's self-defeating. You know, in other words, I think the notion that you can't manufacture, you can't do this, you can't do that. So that all, I don't really pay much attention to that's all atmospherics. I'm kind of like, let's go do it, show me, let's go. I think our people here are excellent. They're capable of doing more. Our customers here need us to do more. You know, Qantas and Chevron and Shell. They need us to be better, BHP. So I think we're going to do more things in Australia in the future.
Jeff, you've talked about nervous laughter being a bad strategy to get us out of problems, that if anything, protectionism would be the worst possible outcome. Are you seeing, though, that as an inevitable consequence of this push-in on austerity and a big dilemma on growth off the back of it?
I definitely see more of, and not just really everywhere I go, travel around the world, there's more of an inclination towards protectionism today, nationalism today. I think it's a natural outgrowth of high unemployment. Your point on austerity programs and things like that. Most times, at least historically, smart people have stood in and said, look, this is not the right way to go. You know, if you think about the U.S. and Europe, a lot of our debts held by people around the world, things like that. It's just not, it's not very practical. I think what governments, you know, Carson, I was a member of President Obama's Council on Jobs and Competitiveness, right? And so a bunch of us kind of got the chance to look at how economies work and things like that. And I would say there's 4 things that governments could work on, and this is true in every corner of the world. You know, one is training. You know, and it's both workforce training, but it's also things like graduating more engineers every year. The second one is a real focus on small and medium-sized business. I mean, more than lip service, really focus on small and medium-sized business. Third thing is just regulatory complexity. You know, no business people like regulations, right? But regulations need to exist. But what they should be is simple. They should be, you know, non-overlapping, and they should be accountable. You know, there are certain permits in the United States that take more than 10 years. It's ridiculous. It's a joke, and I'm sure Australia has those as well. And the fourth thing is infrastructure. You know, broadband, roads, bridges, things like that. Now,
who's going to finance that, though? Because governments are broke, and the private sector is still repairing its balance sheet.
Look, here's what I would say. I would say in the case of training, I actually think the private sector can do more, will do more, but the government, you know, every government invests in public universities, community colleges, things like that. It's just not effective. Every politician in Australia and the United States, they should, after they give a speech, they should say, what's been the impact on a small businessman today? If they feel like investing after I give the speech, then I've given a good speech. If they want to run for the hills, I've given a bad speech. And I don't think they think about that.
Would you serve again if the call came through, no matter which side of politics, to go on another council?
Look, I think I've done. I hate to hog the limelight. You know, the words I've done. I've done. You know, I've been involved with those things. I think it's one of those things that everybody should share. But I do think it's an honor to try to help anybody. I was honored to work with President Obama. I would also want to join in and help wherever I could. But by the same token, I think it's good to have different voices in, and other people should be involved as well.
Can you understand the sense of frustration, though, that, you know, when you meet opposition in another house, that the best of intentions get binned, to put it bluntly, and so you're forever fighting this law of diminishing returns on what's most politically expedient, not what's necessarily best.
Yeah, I think it's
economy.
When we bought our Australian mining company, I didn't go through a thorough analysis of here's what public policy could be, or the carbon tax or something like that. I said, I like the company, I like the business, I like Australia, let's go.
So you saw no sovereign risk?
I just didn't see sovereign risk, and I just didn't do that. So, I think by the same token, it's impossible to be a critic and not try to help. You know, so it's easy to sit back and say, those politicians, they're so stupid, it's ridiculous, blah, blah, blah. So much is true.
Your words, not mine.
So much is true. But look, everything operates better when the political process works. Business operates better, society's happier, people are happier. Everything operates better when we have good leadership. So I root for there to be good leadership. And if there are ways that I can be helpful, or that Steve here in Australia can be helpful, we should do that.
Do you have a fear for your own safety, being in some very dynamic but politically unstable markets? the likes of Nigeria, Russia, has there ever been a moment where you've been on the jet and thought, I'd rather not be going through that airspace today?
I would say, Carson, that I'm careful, right? So in other words, I don't travel with a big entourage or something like that. I've got, I try to be careful personally. I don't take unreasonable risks. But by the same token, I want to be everywhere the company is. You know, in other words, I don't want to delegate my own nose for a country to some, you know, so I've been to Russia, I've been to Iraq, I've been to all these places around the world, because I think it's impossible to delegate that nose for when's a good time to invest. You talked about Nigeria. Nigeria is not a, I look at Nigeria and I sit there and say, they're number 6 in oil, number 7 in gas around the world. They have a 40 gigawatt deficiency in electricity, right? So they have money on one side, they have need on the other side. We should be a huge supplier. Nigeria should be a big country for us. Now, I think we should be investing in Nigeria. I want to understand, but it's unsafe, it's risky. We could invest money and lose it, but those are the kinds of risks we should be taking. But I don't want to read about that in a white paper. I don't want to read about that in a McKinsey report. I want to go and meet the business people. I want to meet the government. I want to meet our own team. I want to say, can we execute on a project even if we had one? I want to smell all those things on our own. So I think it's really important for every business leader, big and small, to see what you're investing in, to touch it, to feel it.
It's nearly 150 countries. Just a brief final thought. How do you not burn out?
You got to love it, man. You know, in other words, you got to have good people. So, you know, first and foremost, you got to have a great team.
But
you got to love. You've got to love everything about it. And for me, no matter how long I've done it, no matter how far I travel, I love the people, I love the customers, I love the challenge, I love the company. That gets brighter every year. It doesn't diminish, you know. It gets, the heat increases every year.
Well, let's just celebrate that with you, and thank you indeed.
Great.
For your time.
Thanks, Carson.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
See you. Thanks.